Welcome to today's edition of 3 Minute Halacha. The Rambam rules in Mishnah Torah Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 29, Halacha 1, that there is a positive commandment to sanctify Shabbat with a verbal statement based on the words Zachor et Yom HaShabbat Lekadasho. This remembrance must be made both at the beginning of Shabbat and at its end. The beginning when we recite Kiddush, and at its departure, the end with Havdala. Vidal de Toulouse, the 14th century commentator, better known as the Maggid Mishnah, comments that according to the Rambam, apparently, the mitzvah of Havdalah is biblically mandated. But there are, he notes, some who disagree and say it's only rabbinic in nature. The Gemara in Brachot notes that when it comes to Kiddush, women are obligated, even though it's a time-bound positive commandment, because they have an obligation to keep Shabbat, Shamor, and therefore they have an obligation to remember Shabbat, Zachor. The Beit Yosef writes in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah that just as women are obligated in Kiddush, they also have an obligation in Havdalah. However, the Pri Megadim says maybe Havdalah is different because Havdalah takes place after Shabbat, and therefore it's not subject to the comparison of Shamor and Zachor, but rather just like any other time-bound positive command from which women would be exempt. In practice, the Shulchan Aruch cites both opinions. Women are obligated in Havdalah just as they're obligated in Kiddush, v'yesh omrim, and there are those who say that they are not. The Shulchan Aruch, interestingly, by using v'yesh omrim, suggests it's a secondary but not the primary halacha, and women should be obligated. But the Ramah notes that since there is a disagreement, women should not recite Havdalah for themselves, but rather hear Havdalah from men. This ruling of the Ramah is very puzzling, and the Achronim deal with it in great depth. Because why should this be any different than women reciting a bracha over a shofar or a lulav? And in fact, the Magen Avraham, following the Bach, rules that women can, in fact, recite Havdalah. The Taz argues that women might only be permitted to recite a bracha over positive time-bound commandments in the case of Torah commandments. But if Havdalah is only rabbinic in nature, then maybe they can't. The Aruch HaShulchan rejects this approach in Reish Tzadi Vav Sif Hey and points out that taking a lulav during the 7 days of Sukkot after the first day is only rabbinic, and yet we allow women to make the bracha, and so he doesn't understand the ruling of the Ramam. In practice, the Mishnah Berurah in Reish Tzadi Vav notes 35 and 36 writes that it's preferable for a woman to fulfill her obligation via a man. However, if a man has already recited Havdalah for himself, it's preferable for the woman to recite Havdalah, or if there's no one else present, the woman can make Havdalah for herself without a question. The Bir Halacha does note that there is a question over whether or not women can recite the bracha of Borei Me'orei Ha'esh, because that's called a Birkat HaShevach, a blessing of praise. The Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata questions that maybe women should make the Borei Me'orei Ha'esh at the end of Havdalah, not in the middle. But Rav Moshe would disagree based on a tshuva in Choshen Mishpat, volume 2, number 47, and ultimately the Shmirat Shabbat also agrees that a woman can make Havdalah as any other person would make and doesn't have to keep the Borei Me'orei Ha'esh all the way at the end. As a result, the bottom line is women can make Havdalah, and it's very common for them to do so. If there is a man present who hasn't heard Havdalah yet, there are those who would prefer for the man to make the Havdalah and the woman to listen in.